Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your man, Bentley Kyle Evans. And yes, we are back with another episode of the Hollywood Blueprint. Now, today, we're going to talk a little bit about one thing that people ask me about all the time, and that is syndication. What is syndication and how it affects you as a content creator? So, let's get into it. So, let's talk a little bit about syndication. The word syndication, we've all heard the word. I remember hearing about the word, and I never really knew what it meant. But as I got into the industry and got more exposed to episodic television, I started to understand what syndication was about. So whenever I ask someone, do you know what syndication is? They always say, yeah, it's the reruns, right? Well, in a sense, they're right, but it's not just that it's a rerun, it's just that the content that was created has entered into a status of what's called syndication. Now, what syndication really means, and I'm going to break it down into layman's terms for you. Syndication is when you have a show and you've accumulated enough episodes of that show to where it now makes sense for that show to carry on into the future. And even after that show has been canceled and they're not making any more of that show, episodes of that show, you've created enough episodes to where the show takes a life on of its own. And then it reaches what they call syndication. And what syndication is, it's when a show has been placed into a system of several independent station groups, which are called a syndicate. So it's just like in the gangster movies, you always heard about a crime syndicate, which meant that it's just not one criminal, it's a group of them. It's a group of individuals that make up a syndicate. So it's the same thing when you think of applying that term in the television and film space as a content creator. The ultimate goal that any content creator would want is for his or her show to make it into syndication. And usually it takes anywhere from 66 episodes and above to qualify for syndication. And there is a reason for that. But for the most part, what syndication means is that now that the show has ran its course and basically the studio has made its money back or some of its money back by way of licensing from a network, now that show exists out on its own. And so the person that put the money up for it in the first place, or the company that put the money up to make the show in the first place, now has to recoup its investment. And the way that they recoup their investment is by entering into the status of syndication. So now the show, because it's now, there's no, in other words, you don't have to pay to produce any more episodes. They've already been paid for. So now you have to figure out a way for the investor to get his or her money back. And the way that they do that is that they take the show out and they put it into the marketplace so that it can run forever and ever, or for whatever specified time period that it's been licensed for, will generate dollars upon dollars upon dollars for the investor. So let's use a few different examples. When I think about legendary shows, I always think about I Love Lucy. I also think about the Jeffersons, and I think about Martin because I was a part of that one, so I understood what syndication was all about based upon what we were able to do with that show. I think we shot 137 episodes of Martin, and they are now playing in syndication, which means that they're on every day, sometimes multiple times a day, and sometimes in different markets all over the United States. And every time those episodes play, they generate money from advertisers. And keep in mind, again, it doesn't cost any money to make old episodes. They've already been paid for. So now all of the money that's generated through the advertisers is really just either paying off the debt or going directly into the content creators' pockets. So that's why it's so important to get your shows into syndication. Now, syndication is broken up into, I believe there's 110 different television markets. And when I say market, that means cities across the United States, major television cities across the United States. And so a lot of times, depending on what city you're in, one particular show may air at a different time than it does in another city, because now it's all about these independent stations that have become a syndicate. They're running it whenever they feel like running it in their market, because in certain cities, certain times are better than other times for a show to air. So it's based upon the independent station group. In LA, if you think about it, in Los Angeles, there are probably 4 or 5 independent stations like KCOP, KTTV, KCAL Channel 9, or I forgot what Channel 5 is, but these are independent stations that are independent from the major networks like NBC, ABC, CBS, and Fox. These are their own localized stations that can only be viewed in this particular city. Well, every other city across the United States also has their own independent stations. And so when you're syndicating a show, you're basically taking that show and you're selling it to all of these individual markets. So now you can start to see how they can accumulate a lot of money. So let me just break down this one scenario. I was talking to a guy, a friend of mine, Clay, and his father created shows like Gunsmoke and some of the early television classics from the 70s. And of course, his father's moved on, passed on, and Clay now owns and operates those shows. Again, some of them are 50 or 60 years old, and they still are in existence, and they're still on the air. And every time you see it, just know that somebody's making some money off of it. So I was talking to Clay one day, and he tells me, hey, you know what's funny? When you see my show, one of my dad's shows on the air, it generates $15 when you see it. And of course, I kind of giggled, and he said, that's nothing to scoff at. Let me break it down for you. So he says, think about it. If you see my dad's show on the air, Gunsmoke, and it makes $15 when you see it. Well, now you might see it come on 4 times in a row. So now that $15 turns into $60, right? And then he goes, now multiply 60 times 110. Well, right now it's too heavy of a math equation for me to figure out, but I can tell you that's over $6,000 a day, right? So now when you break down what's $6,000 a day times 30 days, well, it even gets a little more tricky, because now we're talking about in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per month. And that's just on one show that's been in existence now for 50 years. And if you're still being able to generate $100,000 to $200,000 a month off of a show that's 50 years old, I think you're in a really, really good space. So that just kind of gives an example of how and why these shows can still hold value, and why and how the syndication aspect of content creation is a viable state of distribution, because that's where the money is accumulated. Syndication is exactly what the name says. It's a syndicate of independent stations that come together as one group, and for the distribution of particular content. And for the content creator, it is the holy grail on how a person can make a fortune in the television industry. It's not necessarily for the movie industry, but for the television industry, syndication is pretty much the only way that the content creator and or the production company that financed the series can make their money back and become very, very wealthy. Now, I have been fortunate enough to have 2 shows enter into syndication. One being Martin with 137 episodes, and one being the Jamie Foxx show with 100 episodes. And both of those shows have gone on to become classics, and they still play every day in syndication. So maybe I'm getting a big check, maybe I'm not. But I will say this, syndication is definitely the ultimate goal for any content creator that's entering into the television space. And that's all I really have to say about that today. What are you gonna do? Are you gonna get your content made and get it into syndication? Only you know that. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like to leave in the comments below, I'm looking forward to reading them. So do so, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Hollywood Blueprint. I'm out.